How's it going, Frosties? It's been a hot minute. I wasn't initially going to make a video pre-9.2. At this point, it's super difficult to give definitive answers on anything. All of this borrowed power makes it a little bit complicated. Having said this, it's still helpful to know where things stand. Plus, I know the launch of a patch can be overwhelming, especially for those coming back. So let's get straight into it.
Here we go again.
Once again, this video is carried by those awesome contributors over in the Autotime Mage Discord. This Discord and the resources linked there contain the most accurate and reliable information, so make sure you're checking it out. ToeGrinder himself also has a video going over how the Mage specs are looking for 9.2, so give it a watch as well. All resources are linked below as always. Going into 9.2, the important thing is we aren't Covenant locked anymore. We have the freedom to switch specs. You don't need to worry about being locked into one spec for the whole tier. So how are the specs looking TLDR style? If you're wanting to play only one spec, Arcane is a solid bet for the raid, decent at everything. Fire is looking to be a solid pick for single target and niches such as Execute. In general, Fire's kit is safe for progression, and I do think we'll see much more of Fire this tier. Frost is also looking fairly decent. The ultimate takeaway, in the wise words of Doravan, is that luckily not too much is changing and all three mage specs are in a good place right now. For those min-maxers out there looking to be completely optimal, then it's looking very likely that would involve playing all three specs and potentially all four covenants. The tricky part about 9.2 is that the last three bosses were not made available for testing on the PTR. While this makes for exciting race to world first viewing, usually what classes or specs are considered best within a tier is determined through the last boss. With all of this in mind, the best way to prep for 9.2 is to have all the covenants leveled to max renown. At the moment, spamming Torghast layer 9 is the most optimal way. I will be discussing each spec in detail, including which covenant will see play and more. However, before we do this, when looking at the specs individually, it's important for you to understand what defines a spec being stronger, which isn't necessarily based off of raw sim data alone and definitely not Feelycraft testing on training dummies. Situational logic is extremely important. What are the spec's strengths? What is the fight style? Are we talking single target, sustained AoE? Is there forced downtime? Then you also have utility, double immune, cauterize, and so on. So enough talking from me, let's break down what each spec offers. First up, let's talk about Fire. According to data given by ToeGrinder, Fire is looking to be good for single target, as well as niche situations such as Execute. On top of this, as I stated before, Fire's kit is super safe for progression. Fire's definitely the best filler spec. This is due to its borrowed power going into 9.2 being extremely underwhelming. It's said to be the better spec to be played with no borrowed power and then with the 4-tier bonus only. The second legendary increases its strength by a very tiny margin, and its 2-set isn't great, so it sits pretty much maxed out with the 4-tier bonus. Not to mention, it's also the only spec which doesn't have its legendary share slots with tier pieces. You could get very unlucky on Frost and Arcane and have tier slots drop for you which completely lock you out of your legendary. Fire doesn't have to worry about this. Fire will remain Night Fae with the Sun King's Blessing legendary on wrists with haste verse. Next up is Arcane. Arcane is looking super solid, especially if you only wanted to play one spec next tier. It's an extremely well-rounded spec, decent at everything, with an added speciality of Snap Funnel. You don't need consistent ads around a boss to be funneling, which is great on fights where ads don't live that long. Its defensive kit is super overloaded, making it a very tanky progression spec. Arcane's borrowed power is looking to be the strongest gain of all three specs, with a steady curve as you acquire each stage. I know people mention a lot about Arcane and its quotation movement issues. This is more of a community perception thing. There seems to be a lot of uncertainty around optimizing Arcane on progress, and people can be hesitant because of this. I'd like to clear this up a bit. Arcane's movement is definitely not as bad as people make it out to be. There are a lot of tools at your disposal. If your burst window really does get interrupted, then yes, you do lose a ton of damage. However, the point is that you shouldn't get interrupted. If you're in this position, then you're the one who's made the mistake. And look, mistakes happen. Arcane will remain Kyrian with the Arcane Harmony legendary. Craft it with crit mastery in either slot. I would actually recommend crafting it in both slots if you can, due to the fact it shares slots with tier pieces and you don't want to get shafted by RNG. Frost is looking good going into 9-2, particularly looking solid on uptime fights and cleave. The borrowed power is super strong for Frost, with a steady curve gain. The rotational change is that you will be talenting into Comet Storm on pure single target. Frost will still play Venthyr until the doubled legendary, where Necrolord will finally have a chance to shine and pull ahead. Slick Ice will still be the strongest on pure single target uptime fights, crafted on Waste with crit haste. Freezing Winds will be used outside of single target, and if there is a lot of movement and downtime on the single target fight, craft it in either slot with crit haste. I would again recommend crafting it in both slots if you can, just because of the tier pieces sharing slots. And that's it for this video. It would be disingenuous for me to tell you what to play on each boss at this point. However, I will be making a full raid guide when the tier dust settles a bit. If you have any further questions, don't forget to check out the All-the-Time Mage Discord. Once again, the resources linked there are the most reliable and up to date. What spec are you looking to play in 9.2? Let me know down in the comments. Until next time, bye bye!